At 3 in the morning, the sound of a heavy steel claw hammer smashing into solid metal is not just a noise. It is a violent, earth-shattering violation that rips you straight out of a dead, dreamless sleep. I jolted upright in my bed, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird desperately trying to escape its cage. The darkness of my bedroom, usually my quiet sanctuary after exhausting 60-hour work weeks, was fractured by the harsh, yellow light spilling in from the hallway. Standing there, bathed in that sickly glow, was my mother, Rowena. She was breathing heavily. Her chest heaved under a ridiculous, expensive silk blouse that looked completely out of place in the middle of the night. In her right hand, her knuckles white with tension, she gripped the heavy hammer. At her feet lay the ruined, dented remains of the small digital safe I kept bolted to the floor of my closet. I stared at her, my mind struggling to process the sheer audacity and violence of the scene unfolding in front of me. The air in the room was thick, suffocating. Before I could even open my mouth to demand what on earth she was doing breaking into my home, she reached into the shattered metal box. She pulled out a small black access chip. Then, without a single ounce of hesitation, she threw a crumpled piece of paper directly at my face. It hit my cheek, the sharp edge of the paper scratching my skin before fluttering onto the heavy winter blanket covering my legs. "I have already taken the $50,000 deposit," she hissed. Her voice was a toxic, venomous mixture of panic and absolute, unwavering entitlement. "I co-signed for this apartment, Maeve. That means I own it, and I am selling it to cover this mess." She did not care that she had just committed a felony by breaking into my home in the dead of night. She did not care that her own daughter was trembling in the dark, startled and confused. She only cared about one thing: my younger sister, Cressida. I could hear Cressida outside, wretchedly vomiting onto the wet pavement right under my front window. Cressida had messed up again. It was a tale as old as time. The golden child had partied too hard, crossed a line, and now she needed a getaway vehicle to flee the consequences of whatever disaster she had caused this time. My mother pointed the head of the hammer directly at me. Her eyes were manic, entirely devoid of any maternal warmth or basic human decency. "Do not be selfish," she spat, her words dripping with a deep-seated contempt that I had known and suffered through my entire life. "You are the mule, Maeve. You are the workhorse. Your sister is the prize. She needs to get out of the state tonight. I am taking this chip. If you try to stop me, I will let the loan shark who bought this place throw you out on the street by noon tomorrow." I looked down at the illegal, handwritten contract sitting on my lap. The letters were rushed sloppy. I looked at the woman who had just gleefully sold my sanctuary, my home, the place I paid for with my own blood, sweat, and tears, to a violent underground investor just to bail out her golden child. For a split second, the old me wanted to scream. The old me wanted to cry, to beg, to explain the property law, to fight back against this mountain of family drama and narcissistic abuse. But I did not fight. I did not scream. I just sat there, pulling the blanket up a little higher, my face freezing into a carefully blank mask. "Take it," I said. My voice was barely a whisper, yet it felt heavy with an unspoken finality. "Take the chip. Just go." She sneered at me. It was a look of pure victory. She pocketed the little black piece of plastic, genuinely believing she had just successfully robbed me of the keys to my reliable, sturdy escape vehicle. She turned on her heel and ran out the door. The sound of her expensive designer heels clicked frantically against my hardwood floor, fading into the night. But what she did not know was that the little black access chip she had just violently pried from the ruins of my decoy safe was not her salvation. It was the absolute death warrant for the most expensive thing she had ever owned in her miserable life. She had no idea she had just stolen the digital key to her own prized possession. The silence that rushed back into the room after my front door slammed shut was deafening. It was the heavy, ringing silence that follows a massive explosion. I did not move for a long time. I just sat there in the dark. The scent of her overpowering, expensive floral perfume still clung to the air like toxic residue, making me want to gag. I am a commercial risk underwriter by trade. My entire life, my career, is built on analyzing data, assessing potential damage, and reading the fine print that other people are too lazy or arrogant to read. I calculate odds for a living. And sitting there in the dark, I calculated exactly what was about to happen. Cressida was currently stumbling around in the dark rain, legally intoxicated, high on panic, and completely incapable of making a rational decision. Rowena was likely shoving her toward the vehicle, completely blinded by her own arrogance, convinced that they had outsmarted me yet again. They always thought they won. That was the established dynamic, the unwritten law of our toxic family system since the very day I was born. In my family, mythology always mattered far more than reality. My mother had a severe case of what I call the benefactor delusion. She truly believed that because she gave birth to me, she held a lifelong, undeniable lease on my soul, my income, and my property. The fact that I had paid every single mortgage payment on this apartment for the last 5 years meant absolutely nothing to her. The fact that I worked 60-hour weeks, poring over complex insurance claims and risk models while her golden child slept until noon, was just the natural order of things in her twisted mind. To Rowena, my money was her money. My home was her backup bank account. And my boundaries were just mere suggestions she could smash with a hammer whenever it suited her needs. I picked up the crumpled piece of paper. It was a crude, desperate document. A promise to transfer the deed of my apartment to a man named Bastian in exchange for $50,000 in untraceable cash. Bastian was not a legitimate bank. He was a shadow investor, the kind of man who broke legs and ruined lives when he did not get his return on investment. Rowena had knowingly brought a violent shark into my home to save her precious Cressida. I smoothed the paper out on my lap, feeling the indentations of her frantic handwriting under my fingertips. I should have been terrified. Any normal person would be packing a bag, crying, and calling the police. But I did not reach for my phone. A strange, icy calm washed over my entire body. The anger that had been simmering in my chest for 31 years suddenly crystallized into something hard, sharp, and incredibly precise. They had pushed me to the absolute edge. They had finally crossed the one line I had explicitly warned them never to touch. I was not going to be the victim anymore. I was going to let them destroy themselves, and I was going to watch every single second of it. What happened next would change everything, and they had absolutely no one to blame but themselves. Will they realize their fatal mistake before it is too late? To understand why I sat in the dark and let them walk into a disaster of their own making, you have to understand the architecture of my family. You have to walk through the museum of pain that Rowena had carefully curated for me over 3 decades. There were exhibits in this museum that I visited every single time I doubted my own sanity, every time society told me I should forgive and forget because family is everything. Exhibit A was my college fund. I was 18 years old. I was working double shifts at a terrible, run-down diner on the edge of town. I came home every night smelling like stale grease, cheap coffee, and exhaustion, just trying to save enough money to cover my freshman tuition at the local state university. I kept the money in a joint savings account, a naive, stupid mistake born from the childhood illusion that parents are supposed to protect their children and guide them toward a better future. One afternoon, exactly 3 weeks before my tuition was due, I went to the bank teller to deposit my weekly tips. The balance flashed on the screen. 0. I panicked. I could barely breathe. I ran all the way home, my chest burning, convinced there had been a terrible banking error or identity theft. I found Rowena in the living room. She was sipping an expensive glass of wine, admiring a custom-made, hand-beaded designer prom dress hanging from the doorway. It was for Cressida, who was only 15 at the time, but had been invited to a senior dance by an older boy. When I demanded to know where my money was, Rowena did not even blink. She took a slow sip of her wine and sighed, as if my panic was boring her. Cressida needs to make a good impression, Maeve, she said dismissively. The right dress opens doors for a girl like her. You can just take out loans. You're smart, you will figure it out. She is the face of this family, and she needs to shine. I spent the next 4 years drowning in high-interest student debt, working nights and weekends, while Cressida ruined that exact same dress by spilling tequila all over it just 2 hours into the dance. Exhibit B was the $70,000 settlement. When Cressida was 10 years old, she was involved in a minor fender bender while riding in my aunt's car. She was perfectly fine. She did not have a single scratch on her. But Rowena saw dollar signs. She hired a vicious personal injury lawyer and dragged the case out for 2 grueling years, coaching Cressida to complain about phantom neck pains. They eventually won a settlement of $70,000. From that day forward, Cressida was no longer just a child. She was the family lottery ticket. Suddenly, the crushing debts Rowena had accumulated from her failed art gallery ventures were paid off. The sun was shining. Cressida was elevated to the status of a deity in our household. Everything she touched was golden. Every mistake she made was just a quirky accident. Meanwhile, I was the constant reminder of the hard times, the anchor that had dragged Rowena down before her lucky payout. Exhibit C was the ultimate humiliation, the moment that finally killed any lingering hope I had for a normal, loving family. I was 24 years old, and I had just been offered a massive, career-defining fellowship in London. It was fully funded, a prestigious opportunity that would have fast-tracked my career as a risk underwriter and given me a life of my own. I was ecstatic. I had never been so proud of myself. I made the fatal mistake of telling my family the good news at Thanksgiving dinner. Instead of congratulations, the dining table went dead silent. Uncle Kalen, Rowena's brother and her chief enabler, put his fork down heavily on his plate and glared at me across the turkey. "You cannot go to London," he said, his voice thick with absolute disapproval and disgust. "Who is going to help your mother with the mortgage? Who is going to tutor Cressida for her college entrance exams? You are being incredibly selfish, Maeve. Family comes first. You do not just abandon your blood for a job." Rowena started crying right on cue. She talked about how abandoned she felt, how her heart was giving out from the stress of raising us, how she would surely end up homeless if I left. They guilt-tripped, manipulated, and berated me for 3 straight hours. They tag-teamed me until my spirit broke. I declined the fellowship the very next morning. I stayed in the city. I paid the mortgage. I tutored Cressida, who completely failed her exams anyway because she skipped the testing day to go to a music festival with her friends. These were not just isolated incidents. They were the fundamental building blocks of my existence. The golden child and the scapegoat. The parasite and the host. Rowena had spent her entire life extracting value from me to fund her delusions of grandeur, all while demanding that I be eternally grateful for the privilege of being used. And now she had gone too far. Selling my apartment to a loan shark was not just another manipulation. It was an act of extreme financial violence. It was a declaration of war. She looked at me and saw nothing but a resource to be consumed and discarded. She honestly believed that my entire purpose on this earth was to act as a permanent shock absorber for Cressida's disastrous life choices. She thought she could take the chip to my vehicle, force me to take the blame for whatever hit and run Cressida was about to commit tonight, and leave me to face a violent debt collector in the morning alone. I took a deep breath, the cold night air filling my lungs and clearing my head. The Museum of Pain was officially closed. I was done being the curator. I was done carrying the weight of their expectations and their constant, endless failures. From this moment on, the only risk I was going to underwrite was my own survival. If they wanted to play a high-stakes game of theft and deception, they were about to learn that the quiet, invisible worker bee actually controlled the entire system. Would they ever realize that pushing the quiet one into a corner is the most dangerous mistake a bully can make? To fully comprehend the sheer magnitude of the trap Rowena had just sprinted into, you have to understand the specific, bizarre nature of her financial insanity. My mother was deeply obsessed with the appearance of wealth. She had spent years running a mediocre, failing art gallery downtown, rubbing elbows with local politicians and minor celebrities, desperately trying to convince everyone that she belonged to the elite class. When the gallery inevitably went under, leaving a trail of unpaid vendors, she did not scale back her lifestyle. She doubled down on the illusion. 10 years ago, when I first bought this apartment, my credit history was a little thin because of the student loans I was forced to take out. I had the 20% down payment saved up in cash from years of grueling overtime, but the bank wanted a co-signer on the paperwork just to be safe. Rowena, sensing a prime opportunity to attach her name to a piece of valuable real estate without spending a dime, aggressively volunteered. She did not put a single penny toward the down payment. She never paid a cent of the monthly mortgage, the property taxes, or the expensive maintenance fees. But because her signature was scribbled on that original piece of paper a decade ago, she developed a permanent, unshakable delusion that the property was actually hers. In her twisted, narcissistic logic, she was the benevolent, wealthy landlord, and I was just the lucky, lowly tenant she allowed to live there out of the goodness of her heart. She used this delusion to justify absolutely everything. If she needed cash to buy a new designer handbag, she would threaten to sell the place. If I tried to set a simple boundary, like asking her not to show up unannounced, she would smugly remind me whose name was on the master loan document. It was a persistent, exhausting emotional blackmail that hung over my head every single day of my adult life. But her absolute crowning achievement of financial absurdity happened exactly 3 months ago. Rowena decided that she needed to get into the luxury glamping lifestyle. She saw some young influencers on social media driving massive, high-end recreational vehicles to exclusive national parks, and she decided that was her next grand persona. So, she went to a specialty dealership and financed a custom-built, limited edition luxury recreational vehicle. It was a $350,000 monstrosity. This thing was not a camper. It was a rolling, obnoxious penthouse. It was 40 feet of matte black fiberglass and reinforced military-grade steel. It had a massive engine that pushed 400 horsepower, dual expanding slide-outs, heated Italian leather captain's chairs, a full marble kitchenette, and a highly complex digital sensor system that required a specialized access chip just to start the ignition. It was absurd. It was completely obnoxious. And she absolutely could not afford it. She had completely drained her meager savings and maxed out 3 high-interest credit cards just to make the initial down payment. But to her, it was the ultimate status symbol. She parked it in the oversized driveway of her rented townhouse and spent hours just sitting in it, posting heavily filtered photos online to make her fake friends jealous. When she demanded the chip from my safe tonight, she assumed I kept the access fob to my old, reliable sedan locked up in the little fireproof box in my closet. She thought she was stealing the keys to a practical, unassuming car that Cressida could use to disappear into the night without drawing any attention from the police. But Rowena was incredibly lazy when it came to details. When she bought that massive recreational vehicle, she threw the thick user manual and the spare digital chip directly at my chest. "Set this up," she had demanded, waving her manicured hand dismissively. "I do not understand this tech nonsense. Make it work." So I did. I programmed the internal computer system. I set up the cloud account. And, crucially, I kept the spare access chip. I had placed it in my safe, right next to my important legal documents, simply because it was a high-value item that she kept losing track of. My own car keys were sitting perfectly safe on the kitchen counter the entire time she was violently smashing my closet to pieces with a hammer. She had just violently robbed me of the keys to her own $350,000 mobile palace, and she was currently handing it over to a deeply intoxicated, panicking 26-year-old who could barely parallel park a compact car on a sunny day. I stood up from the bed, the broken pieces of the safe crunching sharply under my bare feet. I walked over to the window and pulled back the edge of the blind. The rain was coming down harder now, slicking the asphalt and creating a dark, watery mirror out of the street below. If you also have a toxic family member who constantly exploits you, please comment the number 1 below so I know I am not alone. What will happen when Cressida tries to drive a massive luxury tank while heavily intoxicated? I stood perfectly still in the freezing shadows of my bedroom, peering intensely through the narrow slats of the window blinds. Down on the street, the scene was playing out exactly like a slow-motion train wreck. The heavy rain distorted the view, blurring the edges of the streetlights, but it provided more than enough illumination to see the absolute, terrifying disaster unfolding in my driveway. Cressida was shivering violently. Her thin, ridiculously inappropriate party dress was soaked completely through, clinging to her skin. Her movements were jerky, highly uncoordinated, and frantic. She was leaning heavily against the massive, matte black side of Rowena's $350,000 recreational vehicle, looking at the little black access chip in her hand with utter, drunken confusion. Rowena was right beside her, gesturing wildly, pointing aggressively down the street, clearly barking orders at the top of her lungs over the sound of the pouring rain. Even through the thick, double-paned glass of my window, I could easily imagine the chaotic argument happening below. Cressida, through her drunken haze, slowly realizing this massive black wall of metal was not my boring, invisible sedan. Rowena, too frantic about the loan shark and whatever legal trouble Cressida had just caused, screaming at her to just get in the damn vehicle and drive away before the cops showed up. The recreational vehicle was massive, a looming beast of machinery that required special licensing, high skill, and a perfectly clear head to maneuver, let alone drive in a torrential downpour while severely intoxicated. My cell phone sat on the nightstand right behind me. My hand twitched involuntarily. Decades of deep conditioning, decades of being forced into the role of the family fixer, screamed at me to pick it up. The old Maeve would have called her mother immediately. I would have run downstairs, barefoot in the freezing rain, screaming that they had the wrong chip. I would have literally thrown myself in front of the massive tires to stop Cressida from committing a massive felony driving under the influence and destroying a vehicle that cost more than most people's homes. I would have absorbed their anger, fixed their terrible mistake, and woken up the next morning to pay the financial and emotional price. But I looked back at the crumpled $50,000 loan contract lying on my bed. I thought about the man named Bastian, the shadow investor who broke legs for a living, who now believed he legally owned the roof over my head. Rowena had not hesitated for a single second to throw me to the wolves to save herself and her golden child. This is the exact moment I learned the true, devastating power of silence. Society constantly conditions us to believe that intervention is always the moral choice. We are taught that if you see someone walking blindly off a cliff, you must grab them. You must save them from themselves at all costs. But what if that person has spent your entire life slowly, deliberately pushing you toward the edge? What if saving them tonight only ensures they will have the strength and the means to destroy you again tomorrow? Napoleon Bonaparte once said, "Never interrupt your enemy when he is making a mistake." My mother and sister were currently in the middle of the most catastrophic, life-altering mistake of their privileged, consequence-free lives. If I ran down there now, I would just be the hysterical, jealous sister trying to ruin their brilliant escape plan. I would be the villain all over again. They would gaslight me, physically take my actual car keys, and leave me to deal with the violent loan shark anyway. But if I stayed silent, if I simply let gravity and consequence take the wheel, I wasn't doing anything illegal. I wasn't hurting anyone. I was merely an invisible spectator. My silence was not an act of submission. It was a highly calculated, strategic weapon. I watched as Cressida fumbled clumsily with the heavy door handle. The massive electronic locks disengaged with a loud, heavy thunk that echoed up to my window. She climbed into the high driver's seat. Rowena stepped back onto the wet sidewalk, waving her hands in a frantic shooing motion, urging her to hurry up and disappear. Suddenly, the amber parking lights of the luxury beast blazed to life, violently piercing the rainy darkness. The engine roared. It was not a normal car sound. It was a deep, guttural, 400-horsepower growl that vibrated aggressively against my windowpane. Cressida did not hesitate. She did not adjust the massive side mirrors. She did not check her blind spots. She just violently threw the massive transmission into drive and slammed her foot down hard on the gas pedal. The recreational vehicle lurched forward violently. It immediately clipped the heavy concrete mailbox of my next-door neighbor, sending massive chunks of stone and plastic flying into the wet grass. The brake lights flared angry and red for a fraction of a second, illuminating the rain, and then the vehicle accelerated wildly. It fishtailed down the slick residential street, a terrifying, massive behemoth completely out of control, swerving dangerously over the center yellow line and disappearing around the sharp curve at the exact end of the block. I stood perfectly still, my breath catching in my throat. I started counting in my head. 1, 2, 3. I knew that curve intimately. I knew the heavy steel guardrails and the steep, unforgiving concrete embankment that separated our quiet neighborhood from the lower, high-speed highway. I knew the sheer mass of that vehicle and the undeniable laws of physics. 38, 39, 40. The sound did not resemble a Hollywood movie explosion. It was so much worse. It was a dull, sickening, catastrophic crunch. The distinct, agonizing sound of premium fiberglass shattering into a million pieces, heavy structural steel folding in on itself, and safety glass exploding across wet concrete. The terrible noise echoed up the quiet street, bouncing off the houses, a brutal and definitive punctuation mark at the absolute end of a long, toxic sentence. Then absolute, terrifying silence returned to the night. I did not gasp. I did not reach for my phone to call emergency services. I knew this neighborhood very well. It was full of nosy busybodies and light sleepers. Within 3 minutes, someone else would make the call. The sirens would be on their way. I turned away from the window. The cold draft from the glass had chilled my skin, but my blood was buzzing with a strange, electric energy. I walked over to the bed, picked up the illegal loan contract, and carefully, meticulously smoothed out the wrinkles. I placed it neatly inside the top drawer of my nightstand. Then I climbed back into bed, pulled the heavy covers up to my chin, and closed my eyes. I did not sleep, of course. My heart was racing, my mind running rapidly through complex flowcharts of legal liabilities, insurance protocols, and property laws. But I lay there breathing steadily, feeling safer and more in control than I had in years. I was waiting for the sun to rise on a brand new reality. A reality where I was no longer the punching bag. The demolition had just occurred, and the falling debris was going to bury them completely. Did they really think they could steal from me and just drive away into the night without consequences? The sun finally rose at 6 in the morning. It was a bleak, gray, unforgiving light, the exact kind of morning that exposes every crack in the pavement and every vicious lie told under the cover of darkness. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the world outside my window damp, cold, and utterly dreary. My phone, sitting quietly on the nightstand, buzzed sharply. I reached over and tapped the screen to wake it up. It was an automated notification from the local police scanner application I kept installed for neighborhood alerts. The headline was short, clinical, and devastating. Major accident. High-value recreational vehicle found abandoned and heavily damaged in the drainage ditch off Route 4. Driver fled the scene. Hit and run protocols initiated. I stared at the glowing letters for a long, quiet moment. Hit and run. Cressida had panicked. Instead of staying with the $350,000 wreck and facing the music, she had dragged herself out of the deployed airbags and run away into the dark night, actively turning a simple driving under the influence crash into a serious, arrestable criminal offense. Typical. When faced with actual, real-world consequences, the golden child's only instinct was to flee like a coward and expect someone else to clean up the massive mess she left behind. I swung my legs out of bed and walked into the kitchen. I moved with deliberate, calming slowness. I ground fresh, dark roast coffee beans. I boiled the water. I slowly poured myself a cup of black coffee, feeling the intense heat radiate through the ceramic mug into my cold hands. The absolute contrast between the peaceful stillness of my kitchen and the catastrophic, life-ruining chaos I knew was unfolding in Rowena's life right now was incredibly intoxicating. My cell phone rang, breaking the silence. It was Veda, my best friend and a certified notary public who worked in the legal department of my risk assessment firm. "Are you awake?" Veda asked, her voice crackling slightly over the phone speaker. "I am," I replied, taking a slow, calculated sip of the bitter coffee. "I saw the neighborhood alert on the morning news feed," she said cautiously. "A massive black recreational vehicle crashed a mile from your place. Please tell me your lunatic mother did not finally snap and try to drive her midlife crisis mobile through your living room." "Not quite," I said softly, a small smile playing on my lips. "But she did break into my apartment at 3 in the morning with a heavy hammer. She smashed my safe to pieces." Veda gasped loudly. "Maeve, what? Did you call the police? Are you okay?" "I am perfectly fine." She thought she was stealing my car chip to help Cressida escape some trouble. She took the luxury vehicle chip by mistake. Cressida completely totaled it in the ditch. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, Veda let out a low, impressed whistle. "Oh my God. The insurance company is going to absolutely slaughter her. Did she get the folder?" I smiled, looking toward the broken metal box still sitting in my closet. "No, Veda. The decoy safe worked exactly as I intended. I need you to confirm something for me. The blue folder. Is it still secure?" Veda's tone shifted instantly, becoming strictly professional and sharp. "Yes. The original, notarized quitclaim deed is locked in the heavy fireproof vault here at the office, exactly where you asked me to put it 6 months ago. No one can touch it but you." "Thank you, Veda," I said. "I will see you at work later today." I hung up the phone. The calmness in my chest solidified into unbreakable steel. My mother liked to believe she was a master manipulator. She believed she could move people around like chess pieces on a board. But she had a fatal flaw. She was profoundly arrogant, and she deeply believed that administrative details were beneath her sophisticated intellect. 6 months ago, I had finally realized that I could no longer live under the constant, agonizing threat of her selling my home out from under me. I told Rowena that interest rates had dropped significantly, and I needed to refinance the apartment's mortgage to lower the monthly payments. I told her it would save her money in the long run. I handed her a massive stack of dense, boring legal documents while she was sitting in a salon chair getting an expensive manicure. Because she never read the fine print, because she believed she was legally untouchable, she didn't notice the quitclaim deed carefully slipped into the middle of the pile. The document legally removed the co-signer, which was her, entirely from the title of the property in order to qualify for the new loan. She just signed where I pointed, completely unaware that she was legally forfeiting every single claim to the apartment forever. And now she had taken $50,000 from a violent loan shark for a property she did not own. She was sitting on a mountain of illegal debt, a destroyed luxury vehicle, and a fugitive daughter. The trap was perfectly set. All I had to do now was gather the ammunition to spring it. How exactly was she planning to explain this massive fraud to the insurance company and the police? I carried my hot coffee over to my small home office desk and opened my laptop. It was time to go to work. As a commercial risk underwriter, I rely entirely on hard data. You cannot argue with hard data, and you certainly cannot gaslight a video recording. When Rowena bought that $350,000 recreational vehicle, she was entirely focused on the heated leather seats and the exterior customizable lighting. She completely ignored the complex, state-of-the-art telematic system built directly into the dashboard. The dealership salesman had explicitly explained that it featured a high-definition, dual-facing dash camera that automatically uploaded footage to a secure cloud server the exact moment the engine started. Rowena, annoyed by the technical jargon, had shoved the thick setup manual into my hands. "Fix it," she had demanded angrily. "I do not have time to remember passwords for a stupid car." So, I set it up for her. I registered the vehicle's computer system. I linked it to a secure, private email address that I created myself. I generated a complex alphanumeric password. And because she never once asked for the login credentials, foolishly assuming the cameras were just decorative pieces of plastic, I never gave them to her. She had absolutely no idea that her prized possession was a rolling surveillance state, entirely under my administrative control. I opened the web browser and quickly navigated to the manufacturer's official cloud portal. I typed in the credentials. The interface loaded instantly. There, right on the main dashboard, was a bright red, flashing alert icon indicating a severe collision event had occurred. With one single click, the unvarnished truth flashed onto my screen. I downloaded the interior dashcam footage from the previous night. The video player popped up. The quality was crisp, 4K resolution, complete with crystal clear, high-fidelity audio. It was irrefutable, high-definition evidence of multiple felonies being committed in real time. I pressed play. The digital timestamp in the bottom right corner read 3:22 in the morning. On the screen, the interior of the luxury cabin lit up. Cressida stumbled heavily into the driver's seat. She looked like a complete, unmitigated disaster. Her expensive makeup was smeared across her face, her hair was plastered to her forehead from the rain, and she was holding a half-empty bottle of expensive vodka she must have raided from Rowena's private liquor cabinet before they fled the house. She slammed the glass bottle down hard into the center console cup holder. She looked directly into the camera lens, though her eyes were glassy and entirely unfocused. She was sneering, a look of pure, unadulterated entitlement on her face. "Look at me," Cressida slurred loudly, gesturing wildly to the empty luxury cabin around her. "Driving Mom's giant tank. Maeve is probably crying in her ugly, cheap little sedan right now. Who cares if I scratch this thing? Mom will just buy another one. She always fixes it." She grabbed the vodka bottle and took a long, reckless swig. She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed loudly in the quiet cabin. Then she threw the heavy vehicle into gear. The camera shook violently as the massive engine revved. Through the front-facing windshield view, I watched the heavy rain lashing against the glass. I watched the vehicle veer wildly down my quiet residential street. I watched Cressida's wet hands slip on the steering wheel as she approached the sharp, dangerous curve. She didn't even attempt to hit the brakes. The video captured the exact, horrifying moment the vehicle slammed into the heavy steel guardrail. The sound of tearing metal blasting through my computer speakers was deafening. The vehicle spun violently, the heavy momentum carrying it right over the concrete embankment. The interior cabin view showed Cressida being violently thrown forward as the massive airbags deployed in an explosive, blinding cloud of white chemical dust. The vehicle crashed down into the muddy drainage ditch with a final, bone-jarring impact. The camera feed flickered, showing Cressida groaning in pain, kicking the heavy door open, and scrambling out into the freezing rain like a rat, leaving the engine smoking and the hazard lights flashing in the dark. Then, the feed cut to black. I sat back in my chair, the silence of my apartment contrasting sharply with the extreme violence I had just witnessed. It wasn't an unavoidable accident caused by bad weather. It was a drunk, malicious, completely arrogant joyride that ended in disaster. I saved the video file carefully. I copied it to my local computer hard drive, then to an encrypted USB flash drive, and finally to a secondary, hidden cloud server for maximum redundancy. I named the master folder the Boomerang. Rowena thought she was cleverly protecting her golden child. I knew exactly what her desperate plan would be today. She would try to hide the fact that Cressida was driving. She would try to report the vehicle as stolen, or worse, try to frame me to claim the massive insurance payout and use the money to pay off the violent loan shark she had invited into our lives. She had absolutely no idea that I held the digital key to her total destruction in the palm of my hand. I pulled the encrypted flash drive from the laptop and dropped it securely into my blazer pocket. The ammunition was secured. The bait was set perfectly. Now, I just had to wait for the monster to call and invite me to my own execution. If you want to see exactly how I spring this trap on them, do not forget to hit that subscribe button and leave a like. Thank you for watching so far. The digital clock on my laptop screen flipped to 8:30 in the morning. My apartment was entirely quiet, filled only with the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of city traffic waking up. I sat at my small kitchen island, staring at the dark screen of my phone, waiting. I knew she would call. She had no other options left. She was backed into a corner of her own making, and like any desperate animal, she was going to lash out and try to drag someone else down with her. Right on cue, the phone vibrated against the marble countertop. The caller ID flashed with Rowena's name. I let it ring 3 times. I wanted her to sweat. I wanted her to feel a fraction of the anxiety she had inflicted upon me for the past 31 years. On the 4th ring, I picked it up and pressed it to my ear. I did not say hello. Her voice came through the speaker, ice cold and terrifyingly calm. It was the specific tone she used when she was trying to sound authoritative, a tone that used to make me shrink into myself when I was a child. "Come to the downtown insurance adjuster office right now," she commanded. "Do not ask questions. Just get in your car and get down here." I leaned back in my chair, swirling the last bit of cold coffee in my mug. Why would I do that? I asked, keeping my voice flat and entirely devoid of emotion. "Because if you do not," she hissed, dropping the calm facade in an instant, "I will call Bastian. I will tell that man you took his $50,000 and ran away. I will tell him you orchestrated the entire sale. He breaks legs for a living, Maeve. He will find you, and he will ruin you. Be at the Sterling Tower in 20 minutes, or you're going to need a hospital bed." She hung up the phone before I could respond. The line went dead. I lowered the phone, feeling a cold smile creep across my face. She thought she had me. She genuinely believed that throwing the threat of a violent loan shark at me would shatter my resolve and force me back into my designated role as the family scapegoat. She wanted me terrified. She wanted me broken. But I was not broken. I stood up and walked into my bedroom. I opened my closet, stepping over the shattered pieces of the decoy safe that still littered the floor. I reached past the casual sweaters and jeans, pulling out my armor. I chose a tailored charcoal blazer, a crisp white silk blouse, and a pair of sharp, black stiletto heels. I pulled my hair back into a tight, severe bun. I applied a subtle layer of makeup, just enough to erase the dark circles from my sleepless night. I looked in the full-length mirror. I did not look like a terrified victim about to be sacrificed on the altar of family loyalty. I looked like a senior commercial risk underwriter walking into a boardroom to finalize a hostile takeover. I grabbed my leather tote bag, carefully sliding the encrypted flash drive into the secure inner pocket. Then, I placed the blue folder containing the original, notarized quitclaim deed right next to it. The heavy paper felt like a loaded weapon in my hands. I drove downtown with the windows rolled down, letting the freezing morning air sharpen my focus. My mother had chosen the location carefully. The insurance adjuster office was located in the Sterling Tower, a massive glass and steel skyscraper in the heart of the financial district. It was the kind of building designed to make ordinary people feel incredibly small and insignificant. It was supposed to be neutral ground, an official setting where she could perform her greatest theatrical act to date, the grieving, responsible mother cleaning up a terrible misunderstanding. I parked my sedan in a parking garage 3 blocks away. I wanted the walk. I needed to feel the pavement under my feet. My heels clicked like gunshots against the concrete sidewalks as I approached the massive revolving glass doors of the tower. Rowena was waiting for me in the expansive, marble-floored lobby. She looked flawless. She was wearing a navy blue designer suit, her hair perfectly set, her makeup immaculate. But I am trained to spot risk indicators. I noticed her hands. They were clenched tightly at her sides, the knuckles stark white. She was tapping her expensive shoe rhythmically against the floor, a nervous tic she had whenever she was lying. When she saw me walking toward her, her eyes quickly scanned my outfit. I saw a flicker of profound disappointment cross her face. She wanted a broken, crying mess in a stained hoodie. She wanted the old Maeve. She did not know what to do with the executive standing in front of her. She grabbed my arm forcefully, her nails digging into the fabric of my blazer, and yanked me violently into a secluded corner near the elevator bank. She looked around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in close, her expensive perfume suffocating me. "Here is the script," she hissed, her eyes starting nervously. "You borrowed the keys to my vehicle last night because you needed to get milk. You were tired. You mistook the massive recreational vehicle for your own car in the dark. You hit a guardrail, you panicked because you were scared of getting in trouble, and you fled the scene. You will sign the affidavit admitting this, and I will graciously pay the insurance deductible." I stared at her, genuinely marveling at the sheer audacity of her delusion. Why on earth would I confess to a felony? I asked, keeping my voice low. That is textbook insurance fraud, Rowena. That carries prison time. Her smile was all teeth, a predatory grimace. If you do not sign that paper today, she whispered maliciously, the man upstairs, Mr. Bastian, the investor who wired me $50,000 last night, will be told you ran off with his money. He is sitting in the waiting room right now. Sign the paper, take the blame, and save yourself from a broken spine. She thought she had successfully cornered me. She thought she held all the cards. She did not realize I had already disarmed her entire trap. Okay, I said softly, adjusting the strap of my leather bag on my shoulder. Let us go upstairs. I cannot wait to see this. The ride up the elevator to the 12th floor was agonizingly silent. The polished steel doors reflected our distorted images. Rowena stood beside me, pulling a small compact mirror from her purse to check her lipstick. She was adjusting her mask, preparing for the performance of a lifetime. She looked entirely self-assured, fully convinced that her plan was foolproof. I kept my hands folded neatly over my leather tote bag, hugging the iPad, the flash drive, and the blue folder against my chest. The doors chimed and slid open. We walked down a long, sterile corridor lined with frosted glass walls until we reached room 4B. It was a massive glass box with heavy, stale air, dominated by a long mahogany conference table. Sitting at the head of the table was Mr. Harlan, a senior claims investigator for the insurance firm. He looked exhausted, carrying the specific kind of weariness that only comes to men who have spent 30 years listening to people lie for money. His suit was slightly wrinkled, and he was rubbing his temples as if fighting off a migraine. But the air in the room was truly poisoned by the man sitting in the far corner. Bastian. He did not wear a suit. He wore a dark turtleneck and a heavy leather jacket. He sat motionless, his arms crossed over his chest, watching Rowena like a hawk waiting for a rat to scurry out from under a rock. He was the shadow investor, the lone shark who had handed over $50,000 based on a handwritten promise. His presence in this corporate setting was jarring and deeply intimidating. Slumped in a chair near Harlan was Cressida. She was wearing oversized dark sunglasses indoors, hiding her bloodshot eyes. She looked incredibly small, nursing a vicious hangover and shivering despite the warmth of the room. She did not even look up when I walked in. Take a seat, Harlan said, gesturing to the empty chairs opposite him. His voice was gravelly. Let us get this over with. I have 3 other fraud cases on my desk today. Rowena sat down gracefully, instantly adopting a posture of profound maternal distress. I took the seat next to her, placing my leather tote bag gently on the floor beside my feet, keeping the iPad in my lap under the table. Harlan adjusted his glasses and slid a single sheet of heavy paper across the polished mahogany surface. It stopped right in front of me. Because Cressida is explicitly listed as an excluded driver on this specific policy due to her past driving record, and because of the severe nature of the hit-and-run crash, this massive claim only works under one specific condition. Harlan explained, his tone flat and cynical. The vehicle must have been taken without explicit consent by a covered family member living at the same residence. He locked his tired eyes onto mine. By you. Rowena picked up a heavy silver pen from the center of the table. She was suddenly the picture of calm, performing her martyrdom perfectly. It truly breaks my heart, she said, her voice trembling perfectly on cue. A single, fake tear welled up in the corner of her eye. I try so hard to raise my girls right. But Maeve took the keys. She took the vehicle without asking. I did not even know it was gone until the police called this morning. I am just so glad nobody was killed. She turned her head slowly, staring me down. Her eyes were hard and venomous, completely contradicting the sweet, sorrowful tone of her voice. She pushed the pen toward my hand. Sign the paper, Maeve, she whispered. Take responsibility for your terrible mistake. Or the shark gets you. The entire room held its breath. Harlan looked bored, assuming this was just another messy family dispute ending in a payout. Cressida sank lower into her chair. Bastian shifted his weight in the corner, the leather of his jacket creaking loudly, a silent, violent reminder of the threat hanging over my head. I stayed silent. I let the silence stretch out thick and heavy, letting the tension build until it was almost unbearable. I waited long enough for Rowena to fully commit to her lie. I waited until there was absolutely no turning back for her. Rowena, impatient and emboldened by my silence, grabbed the document. She aggressively signed her own name on the witness line, dated it, and pushed the affidavit back toward the center of the table. The trap snapped shut. By signing that document as a witness to a false statement, she had just committed felony insurance fraud and perjury in front of a licensed investigator, all in a desperate bid for a $350,000 payout. Harlan sighed heavily and lifted the paper. "And you, Miss Maeve? Are you ready to sign the confession?" I picked up the silver pen. I looked at it for a second, then calmly placed it back down on the mahogany table. "I do have a statement," I said, my voice steady and clear. "But my mother is mistaken. I did not take the vehicle last night. And neither did she." I reached into my bag and pulled out my iPad. I set it firmly in the exact center of the table. I tapped the screen, opening the video file I had saved just hours before. Let us see what really happened at 3:22 this morning. If you have ever had the pleasure of catching a narcissistic abuser in a massive lie, leave a comment with a fire emoji down below. Make sure to hit that like button, because the explosion is about to happen right now. I tapped the play button on the iPad screen. The volume was turned all the way up. Instantly, Cressida's loud, drunken, slurring voice blasted through the quiet, sterile air of the conference room. It was jarring, a sudden burst of chaotic reality shattering Rowena's carefully constructed illusion. "Look at me," Cressida's voice echoed off the glass walls. She sounded arrogant, mocking, and entirely intoxicated. "Driving Mom's giant tank. Maeve is probably crying in her ugly, cheap little sedan right now. Who cares if I scratch this thing? Mom will just buy another one. She always fixes it." On the screen, Cressida took a massive swig from the vodka bottle. The unmistakable sound of glass clinking against the center console rang out. Then came the violent swerve. The camera feed shook wildly. The terrifying, high-definition crunch of heavy steel tearing through a metal guardrail filled the room. The explosive bang of the airbags deploying sounded like a gunshot. Then, the video cut to the chilling, dead silence of the ruined cabin. I reached out and calmly tapped the screen, pausing the video on the final frame of the deployed, dusty airbags. The atmosphere in room 4B shifted violently. The boredom entirely vanished from Harlan's face. He sat up perfectly straight, his eyes wide, his professional demeanor instantly replaced by cold, razor-sharp focus. He looked from the iPad screen to Cressida, who had gone rigid in her chair, her jaw hanging open. "Mrs. Rowena," Harlan said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the heavy weight of incoming legal disaster. "Is that Cressida's voice? The explicitly excluded driver on your premium policy?" Rowena went ash gray. All the color drained from her perfectly made-up face. She looked like she was going to be sick. She stammered, her hands shaking violently as she reached for the iPad. "It is fake," she gasped out, her voice cracking. "It is manipulated. Maeve is a tech person. She created this video to frame her sister. She is deeply jealous of Cressida. This is a deep fake." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the mahogany table. "It is cloud timestamped and cryptographically signed by the manufacturer's own telematic system," I said, my voice cutting through her frantic lies like a surgical scalpel. "It was uploaded automatically at 3:22 this morning. The exact minute the police report logs the crash. The vehicle's internal computer system recorded the weight in the driver's seat, the lack of a seatbelt, and the exact speed of impact. You cannot defake server logs, Rowena." Harlan did not hesitate for a single second. He picked up the sleek black desk phone. "Security," Harlan barked into the receiver. "Get the police liaison officer up to room 4B immediately. We have a code 3 major fraud in progress. Lock down the elevators." Cressida ripped her sunglasses off. Her eyes were terrified, darting wildly around the room. Mom, she whined, her voice high-pitched and frantic. Mom, what is happening? You said you fixed it. You said Maeve was going to take the blame. Rowena ignored her. She was hyperventilating, staring at the paused video on the iPad like it was a venomous snake. But the true danger in the room had not yet spoken. In the corner, Bastian stood up. The sound of his heavy boots scraping against the carpet was deafening. He did not care about the insurance fraud. He did not care about the police liaison. He only cared about his investment. The car is dead, Bastian said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that vibrated in my chest. I do not care about the car. I want my deed. Rowena, you looked me in the eye last night and promised the girl would sign the house over today to cover the 50 grand. Where are my papers? Rowena spun around to face him, pure panic radiating from her every pore. She was entirely trapped between the insurance investigator and the violent loan shark. Yes, she has it. She has the deed. I swear to you. I co-signed the original loan 10 years ago. I own the property. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger at me. Give him the papers, Maeve. Give him the deed right now or he is going to hurt you. Give it to him. I reached down into my leather tote bag. My hand brushed against the smooth, cool surface of the blue folder. I had waited 6 long months for this exact moment. I had endured the insults, the threats, and the constant emotional blackmail, knowing that one day, she would push me too far. That day had arrived. I pulled the blue folder out and slid it smoothly across the mahogany table. It came to a stop right in front of Bastian. Read it, I commanded gently. Read the fine print. This was the boomerang coming back. And it was going to take her head off. Bastian did not hesitate. He stepped forward, towering over the table, and snatched the blue folder with his massive hands. He flipped it open. His dark eyes scanned the dense legal text of the certified document. It was a standard quitclaim deed, printed on heavy legal paper. But the details were what mattered. He saw Rowena's own sloppy, notarized signature at the bottom of the page, dated exactly 6 months ago. He read the clause clearly stating that she was voluntarily and permanently removing herself from the title of the property. And finally, his eyes landed on the heavy, raised county seal stamped at the top, officially confirming Maeve as the sole, 100% legal owner of the apartment. The silence in the room was suffocating. I watched the realization wash over Bastian's face. He was a dangerous man, a predator who survived in the criminal underworld by never being made a fool. And he had just realized that a desperate, delusional woman in a designer suit had played him for an utter fool. He looked up from the folder. His eyes were entirely flat, devoid of any humanity. He did not look at me. He locked his terrifying gaze directly onto Rowena. She isn't on the title, Bastian said softly. His voice was so quiet it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Rowena froze. Her frantic breathing stopped. What? She whispered, genuinely confused by her own ignorance. What do you mean? You quit-claimed it to me when I refinanced the mortgage to lower your payments 6 months ago, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room. I handed you a stack of papers, and you were too busy getting your nails done to read a single word. You legally surrendered every single right to that apartment. You have zero legal claim to the property, Rowena. You never really did, but now it is documented by the state. Rowena's jaw dropped. She looked like she had just been struck by lightning. But I co-signed, she stammered blindly. I am the mother. I leaned in, resting my hands firmly on the table. You took his $50,000 last night, promising to sell him a piece of prime real estate that you do not legally own. That is not just a misunderstanding, Rowena. That is theft by deception. That is grand larceny. The math in the room suddenly became incredibly simple and incredibly deadly. No luxury vehicle, I said, checking off the items on my fingers. No house to sell. No insurance payout coming to save you. And you currently owe a very dangerous man $50,000 that you have already spent to pay off your other hidden debts. Bastian dropped the blue folder onto the table. He took a slow, deliberate step toward Rowena. He did not shout. He did not raise his hands. He just stood uncomfortably close to her, invading her space, letting his sheer physical presence crush her. Rowena shrank back, pressing herself against the glass wall of the conference room. The confident, arrogant woman who had smashed my safe with a hammer just hours ago was entirely gone. She was a broken, terrified shell. "You lied to me," Bastion murmured, leaning down so his mouth was inches from her ear. "You took my money, and you gave me worthless paper." "Please," Rowena begged, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "Please, I will get the money back. I will find a way." "You certainly will," Bastion replied coldly. "The house is gone. But you still have kidneys. You have 24 hours to return my 50 grand, Rowena. After that, I stop asking nicely." He turned away from her in disgust, ignoring her sobbing. He walked past me without a second glance, pushed open the heavy glass door of room 4B, and disappeared down the hallway, melting back into the shadows where he belonged. Rowena slid down the glass wall, collapsing into a heap on the floor. Cressida was openly weeping in her chair, holding her head in her hands. Harlan just sat at the head of the table, shaking his head in sheer disbelief at the chaotic implosion of a family he had just witnessed. I felt nothing. No pity. No guilt. No remorse. For 31 years, I had carried the heavy burden of their endless mistakes. I had paid the debts. I had absorbed the blame. I had sacrificed my own future to maintain their pathetic illusions. But looking at them now, broken and crying on the floor of an insurance office, I realized the ledger was finally balanced. The host had permanently detached from the parasites. Less than 4 minutes later, the heavy glass door of the conference room swung open again. 2 uniformed police officers entered the room, led by a tall, stern-faced man in a sharp suit. It was Thaddeus, the police liaison officer for the Financial Crimes Division. Harlan stood up and walked over to Thaddeus, handing him the fraudulent affidavit Rowena had just signed, and pointing toward my iPad, which still displayed the video of Cressida crashing the massive recreational vehicle. Harlan used words that sounded like music to my ears. Felony insurance fraud. Grand larceny. Hit and run involving significant property damage. Flight risk. Thaddeus nodded gravely. He approached Cressida first. "Cressida, you are under arrest for driving under the influence, leaving the scene of an accident, and reckless endangerment," Thaddeus said, his voice echoing authoritatively in the small room. Cressida screamed when the cold steel cuffs clicked tightly around her wrists. It was a piercing, childish wail. She thrashed against the officers, sobbing uncontrollably. "Mom," she shrieked. "Mom, do something. Call a lawyer. Tell them I didn't do it." But her golden tears bought her absolutely nothing this time. No settlement. No new dress. Just a stern reading of her Miranda rights as the officers hauled her out of the chair and Frog marched her toward the door. Thaddeus then turned his attention to Rowena, who was still crumpled on the floor, staring blankly at the carpet. "Rowena," Thaddeus continued, pulling a second pair of handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, perjury, and we will be investigating charges of grand larceny regarding a $50,000 wire transfer fraud." "Stand up, please." Rowena did not fight. She seemed entirely drained of life. As the officer pulled her to her feet and secured her hands behind her back, the terrifying reality of her situation finally broke through her lifelong delusion. She was going to jail. She was facing massive fines, restitution, and the wrath of a loan shark who was waiting for her on the outside. As they marched her toward the exit, she twisted her body violently, looking back over her shoulder at me. The mask was completely gone. The hatred radiating from her eyes was raw, unfiltered, and deeply toxic. "You did this," she screamed, her voice echoing down the corridor. "You planned this. You are a curse, Maeve. You are a monster. You ruined your own family." I stood calmly by the mahogany table, packing my iPad and the blue folder back into my leather tote bag. I did not flinch. Her words, which used to cut me to the bone, just bounced off me like pebbles against a brick wall. "I didn't ruin you," I said, my voice steady and quiet, cutting through her hysterical screaming. "I just stopped saving you. Enjoy the reality you built for yourself." The officers pulled her through the door. Her screams faded as the elevator doors closed, taking the golden child and the enabling mother down to the lobby, into the back of a squad car, and out of my life forever. I walked out of the Sterling Tower 15 minutes later. The cold morning air hit my face, crisp and incredibly refreshing. The storm clouds had finally broken, and a pale, watery sunlight was beginning to filter through the skyscrapers of the financial district. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message from Veda. The legitimate, legal sale of my apartment, which I had secretly initiated 2 weeks ago with a reputable corporate buyer, had just officially closed. The wire transfer was complete. The money was sitting safely in my private offshore account. I got into my reliable, unremarkable sedan. I put the key in the ignition. I did not drive back to the apartment. There was nothing left for me there but broken safe metal and bad memories. I pulled out of the parking garage and merged onto the highway, pointing the nose of the car north, towards Seattle. I had a new job offer waiting for me there, a new city, and a completely blank slate. For the first time in 31 years, I owed absolutely no one a thing. I did not have a mortgage. I did not have a toxic mother demanding my paycheck. I did not have a spoiled sister to bail out of jail. I was entirely, undeniably free. Many people, including Uncle Kalen, eventually called me in the weeks that followed. They left angry voicemails, calling me heartless, saying that blood is thicker than water. They said I should never have let my own mother face a violent loan shark and prison time, no matter what she did to me. They argued that family requires endless forgiveness. But I ask you this. When does the endless forgiveness become self-destruction? When does being the bigger person just mean giving them a bigger target to hit? I have ever had to be the bad guy in someone else's story just to save your own life? Tell me your story in the comments below. Do you think I went too far by letting them destroy themselves, or did they get exactly what they deserved? Thank you so much for watching my story today. If you believe that family is about mutual respect and not just shared DNA, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story of sweet, undeniable justice. See you in the next video.